The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight. So, welcome to the Weird Tales Radio Show, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic, and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Weird Tales Radio Show, the home of geek, folklore and paranormal entertainment, with me, Charles Christian, as once again we delve into the worlds of weirdness, urban myths, obscure histories, geek culture, ghost magic, witchcraft, the occult, and anything else I think will intrigue you. We start with a diary date, for this show is being recorded on May the 4th. So that's Star Wars Day, as in May the 4th be with you. I know, groan, terrible pun. But anyway, here's 10 things you didn't know about the Star Wars movies. They're in no particular order. First off, Yoda was almost played by a monkey. Yes, it's true. George Lucas originally planned for Yoda to be played by a monkey wearing a mask and possibly carrying a cane. That was until an animal wrangler specialising in handling and training animals for movies pointed out the monkey would spend the entire time trying to pull the mask off its face. Good for you, Mr. Wrangler, pointing that out. Talking of small furry creatures, the word Ewok is never actually said in the original trilogy. The name of one of the cutest, or from my point of view, most annoying species in the galaxy is never actually spoken by any character in the films. The species is only identified in the script and the closing credits as being Ewoks. Most people assume they heard the word from our favourite protocol droid C-3PO. Turns out it's another piece of popular culture that we've been remembering incorrectly. Now, here's the third item. The Return of the Jedi almost had a very different ending. Apparently, George Lucas toyed with the idea that after Luke removes a dying Darth Vader's helmet, he puts it on and proclaims, "Now I am Vader," and turns to the dark side, which would obviously mean the most recent 3 sequels would have been totally redundant. Another little interesting fact, depending on the movie you're watching, Yoda, this is the puppet Yoda as opposed to the monkey Yoda, Yoda has different numbers of toes. In The Phantom Menace, Yoda has 3 toes, but in The Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi and the Sith, he has 4 toes. Another little factor here, somebody else who almost didn't get cast. Harrison Ford almost wasn't Han Solo. Burt Reynolds was a contender to play Han Solo, as was Al Pacino, Jack Nicholson, and possibly as the most favourite contender, Christopher Walken. Another little bit here, E.T. actually features in Star Wars. Okay, it's not the original E.T., but his alien species are present within Star Wars. The Asogians, for that is they, were represented in the Galactic Senate, and their first appearance can be seen in The Phantom Menace. Now, here's a real weird one. NSYNC, anybody remember them? The popular boy band or whatever from late 90s, early years of the 21st century. They almost had a cameo in Attack of the Clones. Yes, apparently George Lucas's daughters wanted them to be featured. So he actually made a small cameo where they were in there briefly appearing as Jedi. I'm not sure whether they were singing and dancing Jedi, but they were in there as Jedi. But alas, they never made it to the big screen as the scene was cut from the final version, reportedly because it met with an underwhelming reaction in post-production screenings. Our 8th factor here is it took 3 hours to film the first opening crawl. That's the bit where in a galaxy far, far away, the lettering flows across the screen. It's now one of the most recognisable movie introductions in history and would take no time at all to mock up with modern technology. However, back in 1977, when the movie was made, The effect was created by using 2-foot wide yellow letters over a 6-foot black paper background. And the camera was then used to make a slow sweeping pass overhead over all the letters and the wording, and the result gave us the crawl we've come to expect in the movies. The line "I have a really bad feeling about this" appears in every movie. It's a bit of a running gag now, and it does vary slightly each time, but the sentiment is pretty much almost the same. It was first uttered by Luke Skywalker in A New Hope, and most recently by BB-8 in The Last Jedi. Han Solo was the most sensitive to potential impending doom, and he said it more times than anyone else. And finally, item number 10 you didn't know about Star Wars. This is James Earl Jones, who was the voice actor for Darth Vader. He recorded all his lines for the first movie, that's The New Hope, in a single day. In fact, he just took 2.5 hours to finish the job. For that, he was paid $7,500, which worked out to $3,000 an hour for his services, which was not bad at all when you consider Harrison Ford only received $10,000 for his entire performance in Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope. But there again, they were shooting this movie in 1975-1976, and that's over 45 years ago. Still on the subject of diary dates, this week's show notionally debuts on the 6th of May, so I've been taking a look at some significant events which took place on this day in history. We start with the 6th of May in the year 878 AD, when King Alfred of Wessex, the king who burnt the cakes, was victorious against the Vikings at the Battle of Edington. Apparently, the Viking leader Guthrum converted to Christianity after his defeat. Jumping forward to the 6th of May, it's 1626. Yes, I know, clearly nothing much happened in the intervening 750 years. Dutch colonist Peter Minuit organised the purchase of Manhattan Island from Native Americans for 60 guilders worth of goods. That's about $500 or £360 at today's prices. The goods are believed to have been glass beads, metal tools, knives, bowls and fur pelts. In 1794, on May 6th, this saw Toussaint Louverture lead a successful revolt against the French on the island of Haiti. Ah yes, the French had just had their own revolution in the cause of liberty and equality, but they were not so keen on extending the same freedoms to their black slaves in the Caribbean. So Toussaint Louverture took matters into his own hands. Moving on, in 1840, Great Britain scored a world first with the launch of the penny black, the world's first self-adhesive postage stamp. It's called penny black because its image is black ink on pale paper background. And on this day in 1937, 6th of May, the German airship Hindenburg crashed spectacularly in flames while landing at an airfield in New Jersey. Although 36 people were tragically killed in the accident, amazingly, and it's not often mentioned, 62 passengers and crew on the airship survived. And to end on a pop culture note, on the 6th of May 2004, the TV sitcom Friends aired the season finale of the 10th and final season in the US, when it clocked up 52.5 million viewers. May Day, or Beltane, which has just passed, is one of those liminal times of the year when the link or portal between this world, the realm of mankind, what we like to call the real world, and the other world, the world of the spirits and elementals, is said to be more porous than at almost any other time of the year. I recently stumbled upon this legend from Wales which focuses upon this portal. The location is the Brecon Beacons in South Wales and a lake called Llyn Cwm Llwch. And apologies to the Welsh for my massacring of their language. Now, It's unusual because the landscape is particularly remote and bleak in the central Brecon Beacons, and it seems an unlikely place to find a calm lake there. But if you look northwest from Corndu or Penny-Fan, just where the steep northern glaciated slopes start to fall away more gently, Llyncoombe Lake captures the eye. The legend passed down through generations about this lake tells of an enchanted island that is normally invisible from the shore of the lake. Apparently a passageway leading from the shore to the island is said to open up on May Day each year. Those who had the courage to pass through the doorway would find themselves in a beautiful garden on the island inhabited by fairies. The fairies would play enchanting music, tell stories of future events, and present visitors with exquisite flowers and luscious fruit. But each guest was told nothing must be taken from the island. And as we know from our other forays into the folklore of the Fae, when a Fae or fairy tells you something, you have to obey them. Don't try and cheat. However, one May Day, a greedy visitor placed a flower he'd been presented with in his pocket. When he emerged from the rock that led to the passageway from the island, the flower vanished and he lost all his senses. And since that day, the door or portal to the island has never been seen again. This area is also home to a tale of what sounds like the Welsh version of Elizabeth Bathory, the Hungarian countess who bathed in the blood of virgins in an attempt to retain her youthful looks. The Welsh story tells of an old woman who used music to lure the weak-willed into the lake waters where they would drown. Apparently, once she has killed 900 people, she will regain her youth and become immortal. So, 2 little valuable lessons there. If a fairy gives you a present and says you must give it back, obey them. Otherwise you risk going mad. And if you are wandering by a beautiful lake in the Welsh hills and you encounter an old woman playing music, move strictly on. Don't listen to her. She's after your soul. You'll find a link to a National Trust website all about the Brecon Beacons in the podcast metadata on the urbanfantasies.com website and on the Weird Tales Show YouTube channel. Now for this week's interview, where we are joined by Carolyn Duffey. Carolyn lives in the US and is a practicing witch and Norse pagan. And she also happens to be the founder and admin of the Witchcraft and Heathens group on Facebook, where you'll often find me lurking as well. Carolyn Duffey, lovely to speak to you. We've known each other virtually over social media for a couple of years now, but this is the first time we've actually spoken. So let's start at the beginning, because you mentioned that you are a practicing witch and also a Norse pagan. So where did those things come from? Was there an interest in witchcraft and paganism in your family, or did you discover it at a stage in your life? How did you get to where you are now?
Well, my grandfather and my great-grandfather were Freemasons, and they both practiced high magic, which I have no interest in. And I didn't learn about that until later on. But ever since I was the little girl in the backyard, I was mixing berries and, making potions. And the interest never went away. And, at the beginning, there was no Facebook or, social media. And so I didn't know what to call myself. I just followed my interests until the first time I found a metaphysical shop. And I was like, oh, hello.
I found my home, yes.
Yes. that would be where I started. At one job, I was working with a couple of pagans, and there was a bookshop attached, and they brought me over there and found some nice beginner books for me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I actually started doing more study.
Mm-hmm. How long have you been following this path now?
Oh, do I have to age myself?
Well, let's just 30. Say longer than 10 years then.
Yes, about 30 years.
Oh, right. We'll gloss over that. We'll edit that bit out. Yeah, so yes, it's not some you've recently caught the bug and gone from there. Okay, now I noticed you are in Tennessee, I believe.
Yes, East Tennessee.
Now, I was there on a business trip a few years ago, and it was in Nashville, and I was getting driven around by somebody who wasn't from Nashville but was in the area and connected with the same business. And he said, the thing you find odd in Nashville is when you meet people for the first time, they will normally people will say, where do you work? Whereas in Nashville, they ask you, which church do you go to? So it rather prompts it, how does living in the Bible Belt match with the witchcraft and the paganism?
Yes, I get plenty of invites to church and people that want to pray for me, especially if they found out, my path. They're worried about my soul and they're going to pray for me. But they're a lot more than, I know it's said a lot, but there's a lot more of us than one would think. I know I wear my milner to work. I wait on tables, and I'll get skull written on my receipts, or people will notice and say something, so or they'll know it's a milner and not call it a Thor's hammer. Or I have interest sometimes, and people want to know what it is, what it's about. Yeah.
But what? It's mainly interest as opposed to hostility.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
What they say behind my back might be another
it's something
thing,
else altogether. Yeah.
Yeah.
And with the witchcraft and indeed with the paganism, is this solitary practice, or are there groups of you who meet up in? Obviously, we've had the lockdown, but meet up in real time as opposed to merely over social media?
There is a group here. I've tried reaching out to them and they didn't seem very friendly. So right now it's solitary.
Yeah.
But in the past, when I lived in Texas, I had two friends that became like sisters and they were practicing. So we'd get together once a week and practice together, or do like a witchcraft, or order stones or herbs together.
Yeah.
And I always found whatever was being worked on when it was the three of us, it was a lot stronger than being by yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
We were all putting our energy together to accomplish things.
Well, let's hope you do find some like-minded people where you are now. Then.
I think when it's time and right, it'll happen.
Yeah. And is that relating just to the witchcraft side of things, or also to the paganism side of things, or are they separate?
Yeah, I think they're combined.
They're combined. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. As I say, I know you through the Facebook group. What is your view of people coming into it new? I have noticed on these groups there seems to be a lot of, I'm suspecting they're still in their teens, but they seem impressed by the fictional TV depictions of witchcraft, and it's all about smiting down their enemies, and how do I do this, and how do I get a love potion, and how do I do this to somebody, and it all seems to be a little bit you do know that's fiction that you're seeing on the television.
With the young ones, you obviously have to look at their age.
Yeah.
So, I think it's great that the interest is there, and, with age and time and listening to other people and doing studies, they'll realize that's not what it's about.
Yeah.
And, I don't hold any ill will towards them.
Yeah.
If I was that age and I was, discovering the books and the social media, I can't say that I wouldn't be thinking some of the same things.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
they're still babies.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
yeah. Yeah.
I think the interest is great, and with time they'll learn and hopefully have somebody to guide them a little bit.
Do you think people approaching it for the first time realize how much study and learning there is, and that, we do see posts up there, does anybody know a spell for this? And it seems to be very much a quick fix, whereas, there's no shortage of books out there, there's no shortage of online resources and things. Do you think people are looking for a quick result rather than being prepared to put the knowledge in?
Certainly, yes. And again, they'll learn with time that it's not one-sided. You have to put your own effort. You can't just say, I want a job and do a spell for a job and not go out and look for one.
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
You have to put in the effort on your side.
Yeah.
So I think, the magic helps and helps, achieve your goals.
Yeah.
But you can't just sit there and wish for something.
Is the sort of demographic for witchcraft more females than males, do you think? Always seems
Yes,
that
absolutely.
way. Yeah.
In the witchcraft, it's mainly females, and in the Norse pagan, it's more males.
Yeah.
But, a lot of the witchcraft and the Wiccans, it's love and peace, and for the Norse, it's manlier, I guess you would say.
Yeah. I know some pagans, males, obviously like the blots idea of things, and lots of ale and eating meat and so on.
Growing.
Yes.
Yep. And the foraging and, woodworking and foraging, and
yeah,
it's more attractive to men, I guess. Not that women can't do it.
No. What is the general scene like in the United States these days? Do you think it is a growing movement, both paganism and witchcraft?
Absolutely. Yeah, because if I wear my pentacle out, it's recognized.
Yeah.
If I had done that 20 years ago, nobody would have known what it was.
Yeah. That's interesting, that. Do you think it suffers from a bit of stereotypes that, I say, people get their impressions from movies and cinema about what witchcraft is really like and what goes on and what doesn't go on, and the same with paganism to a lesser extent. I think most people don't really understand that one at all. The witchcraft sort of idea is being taken over by Halloween, isn't it? And it's all, Halloween costumes, sexy witches, or cackling crones, but there doesn't seem to be normal people, if you like.
It's neat that you brought that up, because like the pointed witch's hat, I've seen practicing witches wearing their hats and stuff, and that's 100% Hollywood. The original hats that had, the black hats with the points were for markets and fairs. Those were the women selling beer. So they had the big hats to make them easily recognizable so people could get their drinks.
Ah, right. That makes sense. Yes. And I mean, when you do see pictures of the
witches and the memes and everywhere,
witches in Salem and things like that, they're all wearing just basic 17th century clothing and sort of the mop cap or lace caps and things, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you look back at Salem too, none of them were real witches.
Well, no, that is the thing,
Yeah.
and
But
indeed,
it has made a neat
if you
gathering place for people who follow the craft.
well, I mean, it's a classic example of persecution, isn't it?
Yes.
And I mean, if you look at witchcraft trials throughout the centuries, both in North America and in the UK and in Europe, the number of people who appear to have genuinely believed they were practicing witchcraft, as opposed to people who were rounded up, tortured, and condemned or confessed to being witches. The number of, if you like, genuine ones is probably just a handful, isn't it?
Yes.
That.
Come on, we're too crafty to get caught.
Well, that's good. That's a good point.
Yeah.
And I mean, you also get that slightly sexist thing that if women were suspected of practicing magic, they were witches, whereas men who were doing it tended to be, certainly in the UK, they'd be called cunning men, and they were sort of local folk doctors, and they were the person you went to if you wanted your lame horse curing, and they were, highly regarded as providing a valuable service to the community.
They didn't want women to have that power or strength, and that was a man's area.
Yes. I mean, it is noticeable over history how the wise women who sort of applied herbs and things like that, and natural medicines going back in medieval times, how they got edged out by men and marginalised and eventually accused of witchcraft and being in league with the devil and things, and persecuted. I mean, that's another thing, isn't it, that people wrongly assume that witchcraft is synonymous with some kind of Satanism or connection with the devil. It's got absolutely nothing to do with it, has it?
No, not at all.
You're listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian.
What about going forward? Are there any new developments on the American scene? I mean, it looks as if it sort of sprang to life in the 60s and the 70s and then rather went underground when we had all the nonsense with the ritual Satanism and all that sort of child abuse furore. We had it in the UK as well, with people coming out with preposterous claims, children coming out with preposterous claims. And a lot of people obviously went underground at that point because it wasn't a sensible thing to do. Is it now sort of settling out more and becoming more mainstream again?
Yeah, absolutely. There's it's definitely more out in the open.
Mm-hmm. Now, coming up soon, the next couple of days, so the show will actually go out after this, but we've got 1st of May, Beltane, if we go with May Eve. Are you going to be doing anything special for that? Or do you have any rituals you practice coinciding with the Wheel of the Year?
We'll probably have a nice meal. Maybe go for a nice hike.
Yeah.
We live right by the Smoky Mountains, so we have some beautiful areas to go hiking and be with nature.
Mm-hmm.
And where it's not overcrowded, where you're running into other people. You can go on some of these trails and not run into a single soul.
Yeah.
So, you can go out there and practice without being interrupted.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to leave offerings or...
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll leave crystals for other people to find.
That's nice. Yeah. Do you have that thing over in America of fairy doors, where people put little doorways up against trees, supposedly for fairies to go into.
I haven't seen any, but that would be neat to find. Maybe next time I'll leave some behind when I go up in the mountains.
Yeah, we went for a walk in a wood recently, and with hindsight, it was obviously popular with children, and they were sort of playing around there. It had been a project, but all the trees had little doorways lent up against them, tiny little.
I've actually seen pictures of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, very neat.
Yes.
Fun for the imagination for the little ones.
Well, it is. It is. And what about your family? How do they view your interest?
They're very supportive. My daughter, I don't like to push a spiritual path.
Yeah.
So sometimes she's very interested and I'll buy her a book, and other times not at all.
Yeah.
But, she comes and goes, and, I guess that goes with the age. Yes. She already knows the witchy TikTokers are all ridiculous. It was some of the things that have been going around when they all wanted to curse the moon.
Yes, that
she
was.
Saw that. Instead of following suit because she has some knowledge, she was laughing and came out and showed me and was like, "What are these girls doing?"
Yes, that does seem to be one of the features, doesn't it? That people don't really understand that you can't fire thunderbolts, and we've just had season on Amazon, haven't we, where the Scarlet Witch appears and stops time and moves the universe almost. And again, it's that crossover, failing to understand that those are fictional powers, not real powers, and cursing the moon.
But the good thing, it does spark an interest for the younger generation, that they're either gonna, go away from it, or it sparks an interest and they'll start studying and become wiser.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people bash the younger ones, and I think you really have to have some understanding. People forget what it was like to be that age, and
yes, a good point you're making. Yes, I mean, I'm considerably older than you, but I remember sort of hippie 1960s, and yes, all we need is love, and all the world's problems will be solved. And you look back at it and you think, how naive were we? But
and I think you have a stronger imagination, so it's easier to believe that you can shoot fireballs out of your hand or have more control.
Yeah, I suppose that's good. Yeah, I suppose that's good. If someone was starting either young or older, wanting to take an interest, or perhaps had always had an interest but never pursued it, where would you start these days? Because, I mean, seems to be one of the rules of witchcraft is you don't talk about witchcraft, so it's very hard for an outsider to find a group of like-minded individuals to get involved with. It's all very closed off, it's all sort of invitation only.
I really don't think that's the way it is anymore.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, not here. When I was younger and finally stumbled upon a metaphysical shop, now every town has one.
Mm-hmm.
And, the girls wear the clothing, that says witch, or, granddaughter of the witch you couldn't burn. And all the bookstores now have a special section just on witchcraft and tarot cards and runes with tarot decks. And you can get a Ouija board.
Right. Yeah. You sound like you're better equipped over in the States than we are in the UK, where there's really only very few shops that openly sell things like that, and they still get flack from other shopkeepers and other people. That's intriguing. Yeah, obviously we've just had lockdown, so social meetings have been off the cards anyway. But do you think the trend now is for more solitary practitioners rather than group practitioners?
I definitely think solitary is still a big thing, but it seems like there are more groups coming together. There's a group here and they have get-togethers. Around Christmas they'll have a fair. The entrance is some canned goods for the food pantry.
Oh, right.
Which is nice.
Yes.
And they'll do it, downtown in the fairground. And in Knoxville, there's one group that shows up to everything with their sign that we're all going to hell. That, have 4 or 5 people and do their little protest on the side, but no one pays them any mind.
Yeah.
And it's nice because nobody gives them any slack or gives them any trouble either.
Yeah.
They're just ignored.
Best way, yes.
Yeah, there's no going back and forth or people giving them a hard time, which shows the character, I think, of the group getting together.
Yeah. How would you sum up, if you like, the spiritual side of witchcraft? I mean, again, we're into that area of the difference between the fictional perception and the reality. I mean, most of the practitioners I've met seem very much of a view that, what the world needs is a lot of peace, love and understanding. And, their hearts are in the right place. They care for the community. They care for the environment. Indeed, many witches seem to have been quite early on the ecology front and the fact that we and the planet are indivisible. We both need each other. Would you say that's a sort of a correct view of their beliefs, your beliefs?
Yeah, I mean, it's about being one with nature, and of course people want to protect that, which could be great moving forward in time, if we influence other people to make changes, caring for our environment and not destroying it.
Yeah.
Save the whales.
Yeah, exactly. Where are you in terms of lockdown now in your part of the world? Is it opened up again? Is life returning to normal, or is it still?
I think for the most part, they're starting to lift the mask mandates. So that's nice. And they're starting to have, gatherings again.
Yeah.
In downtown here, they do festivals every other weekend, and they're starting them up again, but they're only letting so many people in at a time, and so it doesn't get overcrowded.
Yeah, yeah. So life is starting to return to normal.
Yes, for now.
For now. Well, exactly. That is the big if, isn't it?
Yes.
It doesn't prompt another surge.
Well, we'll see. Everybody's getting their vaccinations and feeling very safe. So
yeah,
we'll see if that's a good thing or if it backfires.
Yeah. And your own view on the vaccine? No issues with it? I mean, obviously there's the scientific issues, but you think it's a good thing? The vaccination?
I think it's a good thing for people at high risk or the elderly. I worry about long-term effects, so my daughter won't be getting it.
Yeah.
She might be better off just getting the Rona.
Yeah.
The coronavirus.
Yeah. Well, Carolyn, appreciate you've been running around and just got back from downtown, wasn't it? You were taking your daughter somewhere.
Yes, she started her first job today.
Oh.
So I'm nervous. I don't know how nervous she is, but I'm nervous.
Sure, it'll be all right. Just don't tell her that she's got to go back again tomorrow and the day after.
Well, it's going to be interesting because I got her a job where I work.
Ah, right.
She can't start arguing with me while we're there.
Or are you going to try and make it so you're on different shifts?
The same shift so that she has a ride back and forth.
Ah, right. Oh, dear.
Right. I have one of those that refuses to get her driver's license.
Right.
She'd rather me drive her. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
I might have to quit.
You still have to drive her there then, though, wouldn't you?
Yes, I would.
Wonderful. Anyway, Carolyn, thank you ever so much for your time. That's been brilliant talking to you. All the best for the coming months.
Thank you. You as well.
A few weeks ago, I told a story of a doctor, Dr. Lampson, who carried out his murder, who murdered his victim by lacing some Dundee cake with poison. This time we don't have Dundee cake, instead we have tapioca milk pudding. And we're talking about Dr. Edwin William Pritchard, who was hanged in 1865 for the double murder of his wife and mother-in-law. The Glasgow practitioner, that's where he was working, first came to the attention of the public in May 1863 after newspapers carried graphic reports of a disastrous fire at his Glasgow home in which one of his servant girls was burned to death. At the time, the authorities did have some doubts about the incident, particularly after his insurance company disputed his assessment as to how much property had been destroyed, but no further action was taken. However, even before this incident, Dr. Pritchard had earned himself a reputation, albeit a bad one, in certain medical and social circles. Dr. Pritchard's career began, promisingly enough, as a surgeon in the Royal Navy. After this, he went into practice as a doctor in Yorkshire, where he started to earn a reputation for being a womanizer and a liar. In 1860, he moved with his wife, Mary Jane, and their 5 children to Scotland and set up practice in Glasgow. Try as he did, Dr. Pritchard was never accepted by the social and medical societies of Glasgow. This is not surprising when you consider that many of his medical diplomas were actually purchased in absentia, which means he didn't actually attend, from obscure European universities. He habitually handed out signed photographs of himself dressed in full Masonic regalia to complete strangers, and he gave public lectures about his earlier life in the Navy, including stories of having hunted the Nubian lion, that's an African lion, in the prairies of North America. Oh yes, and there was the fact that women really weren't safe in his company. In the summer of 1864, his wife caught him in one of the corridors of their house, kissing the new maid, 15-year-old Mary MacLeod. A few weeks later, Dr. Pritchard was helping the maid to induce a miscarriage, while his wife began to suffer from stomach pains and attacks of vomiting. Mrs. Pritchard's illness continued for several weeks, but cleared up almost immediately when she went to stay with her parents in Edinburgh. Her good health remained throughout the Christmas period, but on returning to Glasgow and her husband in the new year, she once more fell ill. Her symptoms, retching and delirium, were always at their worst after mealtimes, particularly if she'd had some liquid food. Sometimes she was so ill that she had to stay in her room and her husband had to take her food up to her. Dr. Pritchard and the many colleagues he consulted about her condition all agreed she was suffering from gastric fever. In February 1865, after one particularly bad attack, Dr. Pritchard arranged for his mother-in-law, Mrs. Taylor, to come and nurse Mary Jane. Mrs. Taylor apparently had 2 obsessions in her life. One was that she idolised her son-in-law, as Dr. Pritchard, thought he could do no wrong, and the other was that she was addicted to a well-known opiate called Batley's Mixture. On February the 13th, Mrs. Taylor arranged for herself and her daughter to have some tapioca pudding after one of their meals. After eating it, both of them were violently sick. A few days later, Mrs. Taylor was taken ill again, vomiting heavily and then falling into a coma. Dr. Pritchard attended to her and then sought a second opinion from a colleague, a Dr. James Patterson. After examining her, Dr. Patterson's conclusion was that she was suffering from narcotism, and after hearing about her addiction to Batley's Mixture, remarked lightly she had had a good swig of it. The following day, February 25th, Mrs. Taylor died. On March 1st, Dr. Patterson informed the district registrar that he could not complete a death certificate for Mrs. Taylor as the death had been sudden, unexpected, and was mysterious. However, still no action was taken, and Mr. Taylor was buried after Dr. Pritchard completed the relevant death certificate, describing death as down to paralysis and apoplexy. 2 weeks later, the cook at the Pritchard household made an egg flip, kind of souffle, for the sickened mourning Mrs. Pritchard. Sugar was needed for it, and Dr. Pritchard kindly offered to get it from the dining room where it was normally kept. However, his footsteps were heard to go not only in the dining room, but also into his surgery. In due course, the completed egg flip was taken to Mrs. Pritchard. She drank it and was violently sick, as was the cook, who had also had some. 2 days later, Mrs. Pritchard became delirious. Once more, Dr. Pritchard called in his colleague, Dr. Patterson. He in turn prescribed a sleeping draught for the sick wife, but to his surprise, Dr. Pritchard denied having any of the potion's ingredients. As he said, the only drugs he had in the house were chloroform and Batley's. Dr. Patterson therefore wrote a prescription for Dr. Pritchard, but it never reached a pharmacist, and a few hours later, early in the morning of Saturday, March 18th, Mary Jane Pritchard died. The following Monday morning, Dr. Pritchard filled out another death certificate, this time for his wife, noting in the relevant place that the cause of death was gastric fever, duration of illness 2 months. Having completed this formality, he travelled with the coffin to his wife's home in Edinburgh. There he had the coffin lid unscrewed so that he could look at his wife for the last time, and then, to the astonishment of the assembled mourners, he kissed the corpse with great feeling, that's the newspaper quote, on the lips. That same day, an anonymous letter signed Amor Justiae, friend of justice, arrived at the Procurator Fiscal's offices, that's the equivalent of an Attorney General, in Glasgow, drawing attention to the 2 mysterious deaths. The police got to work immediately, and when Dr. Pritchard returned from Edinburgh a short time later, they were at the railway station to arrest him on suspicion of having caused his wife's death. The police were very thorough and very successful in their investigations. At the Pritchard house they found a bottle of Batley's laced with aconite, which is a poison, and a sack of tapioca saturated with antimony, which is another poison. Investigations also revealed that over the last 9 months, Pritchard had purchased nearly 5 ounces of the poisonous tincture of aconite and 2 ounces of tartar emetic, which contained the powerful irritant poison antimony. An autopsy of Mrs. Pritchard revealed no trace of disease to which death might be due, but large amounts of antimony were present in all the organs analysed. Later, when Mrs. Taylor's body was exhumed, that's the mother-in-law, it was also found to contain antimony. In due course, Dr. Pritchard stood trial for the double murder of his wife and mother-in-law. Pritchard strenuously denied the charges, but the prosecution's medical and circumstantial evidence, combined with the revelations about his relationship with young Mary MacLeod, were overwhelming, and he was convicted by the jury and sentenced to death. Dr. Pritchard had the distinction of being the last man to be executed in public in Scotland. He was hanged on July 28th, 1865, before an estimated crowd of 100,000 people. Nicknamed the human crocodile by the way he had wept over his wife's body, Pritchard was so unpopular that after his conviction no one even attempted to get up a petition calling for his reprieve. One other medical practitioner also fared badly at the trial. This was Dr. James Patterson. His testimony that he had suspected Mrs. Pritchard to be suffering from antimony poisoning at the time of Mrs. Taylor's death, but had not informed the authorities, would have been a breach of professional etiquette. Oh yes, doctors keep their secrets, all right, was not well received by the court. Two mysteries remain. First, who sent the anonymous letter signed Amor Justii? No one ever admitted to being the author of the letter to the Procurator Fiscal, although suspicion fell on two medical students who were resident within the Pritchard house throughout the whole period and must therefore had some idea of what was going on. And lastly, when Dr. Pritchard was hanged, he was wearing a pair of brand new patent leather boots. However, a few years later, when his grave was uncovered during building work on a new courts complex, the skeleton was found to have no boots on. Here's another on my Fabulous Creatures feature, which I write for the Ancient Origins magazine. And this time around, I'm looking at the leprechaun, which may seem a little odd, but I actually wrote it for Ancient Origins on March the 17th, which is St. Patrick's Day. So it makes a little bit more sense. So, we all know the idea of the leprechaun, a little man in a green coat with a beard on his chin and a green stovepipe hat with a buckle on his head. And yes, he's Ireland's favourite folklore character. But who or what are leprechauns? Leprechauns, and there are a number of alternative spellings of the name, appear in the historical record in the medieval times, possibly dating back as long ago as the 8th century. Anyway, there's an Irish tale called The Adventures of Fergus, son of Letty, which is the first tale that mentions them. And by the early 19th century, leprechauns had developed the traits with which they are now associated, including their skills as cobblers, who could make and repair shoes. This was apparently for fairies who had worn them out by dancing around their fairy rings all night. And it's also said that leprechauns were possessors of great wealth in gold coins that had found in treasure crocks buried in olden times. The Irish writer and folklorist William Butler Yeats, we encountered him a few weeks ago having a mystical battle with Aleister Crowley. He describes leprechauns as solitary fairies to distinguish them from trooping fairies or the good people who live in larger communities beneath fairy mounds. Leprechauns also differ from other types of fairy in that, although they may indulge in mischief, pranks and practical jokes, they are usually not as malicious nor deliberately cruel to humans as other fairy folk are said to be. This, incidentally, is why some Irish folklorists suggest leprechauns actually share more in common with dwarves than other fairies. Leprechauns are said to be difficult to capture, but if you do find one, they will grant you 3 wishes if you set them free. But, as with everything to do with otherworldly creatures, you have to be very careful what you wish for. A famous instance of this is the tale of the leprechaun and the rainbow. Apparently, when a couple of poor farmers in Ireland, husband and a wife, pulled their very last carrot out of their garden, they found a leprechaun dangling from the roots. Being captured, the leprechaun promised them 3 wishes in exchange for his freedom. The couple could not decide on their wishes, so the leprechaun told them they could have all they ever wanted when they found his pot of gold hidden at the end of the rainbow. So they let him go and spent the rest of their days chasing for the rainbow's end. 3 other things you might not know about leprechauns. Firstly, until the late 19th century, leprechauns were said to dress in red jackets, red breeches, and wear a cocked hat. The later green colour is derived from the green flag of the Irish independent movement and, coincidentally, green ribbons worn on St. Patrick's Day. Secondly, there are no female leprechauns, which may also explain why they are frequently described as being grumpy. How do they reproduce? I don't know. Maybe like Topsy, they just growed. And thirdly, if a leprechaun ever offers you a shoe to try on, just say no. Otherwise you will be compelled to keep dancing until the little fella condescends to remove it. And that's it. We're totally out of time again. A big thank you to this week's guest, Carolyn Duffey. And before we go, here's a thought to ponder on that I spotted on Facebook. I know, I spend too much time on social media. Apparently 50% of homeowning is hearing strange noises at night and hoping they are made by ghosts. Because you know you can't afford to call in plumbers or builders to fix the noises if it turns out to be something physical wrong with your property. Got sympathy for that idea. Now it just remains for me to say this is Charles Christian saying thank you so much for listening in. Please join me again next week for more weird tales in these weird times. Until then, stay well, stay weird. Goodbye.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon, which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, folklore, and the paranormal. You can keep in touch with us online at www.urbanfantasist.com, by email to urbanfantasist@icloud.com, and on Twitter @urbanfantasist. Join us again next week for another edition of the Weird Tales radio show. Goodbye.